In this video, we're going to look at Stable Diffusion's Dream Studio online interface to start with an image prompt and use that image prompt to generate a better image. So in this case, we're starting out with this image here. And from this image, we're going to use the prompt and the image strength and the negative prompt. Stay tuned. We have a chat about this in a few minutes to understand how we can get results that look like these. So let's get started. As you can see, we don't understand whether this is a building, whether this is a vase. It could be a lot of things, right? Because the scale is not quite there because some of the architectural elements are missing. Now, to add that level within the architecture element requires a significant amount of input, which is why I think it's a perfect example to try out with AI. So within dreamstudio.ai, I'm going to go in here and plug this in, and you can even see here I have some previews, but let's just start clear from scratch. So I'm using, and this should be the default one, the SDXL beta model, and then the prompt is futuristic building with glass and metal facade and people in front. Photograph realistic. There's also the option to put in a negative prompt, so ugly, tiled, blurry, blur, anything that we don't want in there. So I'm going to minimize that. And the key here is the image strength, right? So we don't want to go with 100 because if we do that, it's basically going to produce everything that it already has. It's not going to really change much. So what I found through trial and error is that so between 60 and 40, it gives us predictable enough results that also enhance the image as it currently stands, as opposed to completely change it. Now, some of these are quite okay. We can tell that it understands that we should have something that looks a bit more glass-like within the facade, but sometimes it does miss out on some of the details. So we can rerun this a couple of times just to see whether we get better results. And I'm going to try one with 40%. And what I really like about this interface as well is it shows us exactly what kind of image it's taking as the input and how much it's blurring it. And now that it blurs it a lot more, the results are probably going to look quite a bit different. Maybe it's not even going to be the same massing per se, but something that has the same mood, a little bit of the same. And you can see these are very different, but what does it have that it's in common? The outline is more or less the same. Right, so the edges are the same, the mood is the same, but the context is quite different. So now let's try with something like 50. And you can tell some of these are quite successful, some are not. We can open them larger so we can zoom in. For example, this one works fairly well. Actually does make sense. There's some kind of element in here. It's quite different though, isn't it? And this one here is also quite different. You can see how it's kind of related to that, but it changes. So let's push this out to something like 57%. And the idea here is that once we run this a couple of times, maybe there is an image that we believe grabs this a bit better and represents what we're doing a little bit better. Again, sometimes it does require doing it a couple of times just so we find something that we're satisfied with. And once we're satisfied with an image, then we can go and run the generation from it. So I'm not very happy with any of these images, so I'll keep running this. And there are a couple of different ways to run this. So at the top we have style, and we can play with the style. So there's enhance, which is the default one, photographic, digital art, comic book. So the ones I play with are 3D model, cinematic, digital art, photographic, and enhance. So enhance is the one that works the closest to the original. So we can try to run it with a couple of the different models here just to see if it makes a difference. In the most part, because we do have a fairly strong image strength, it's going to try to keep it as close to the original as possible. But nevertheless, it does help out to just give a different idea. Now you see here we get a scale that's totally off. And this one is a little bit better, but there's something that doesn't quite work right. So out of all these, I'm going to pick one now. Not a big fan of any of them. But we have to also remember that this is an intermediate step. It's not the final thing, right? So that one is quite different, but it actually looks fairly well. I quite like this one as well, of the way that it's decided to resolve that connection between the two parts. And the last one that I like is this one, which is very similar to the concept of the initial one, but it's exaggerated quite a bit. So what we can do then is click on variations, and it's going to use this image here, which you see now here in the image input, as the starting point. And from that point, it's going to continue to generate images that try to make this a little bit stronger and enhance it. And so now you see it kind of takes its own language, and if we like one more, we can do it. But now that I see those, I think they don't work that well for a building. So let's try a different one. Let's try this image here. See what that comes up with. And it's keeping the prompt exactly the same. It's keeping the negative prompt exactly the same. It's keeping the image strength the same and the style fairly similar. So we can see now that this is getting quite a strong look already on its own, and it's being enhanced, right? So there's a little bit more detail from what we had initially, and now we have this kind of base that's actually quite different. What's funny is from the perspective it looks the same, but in reality it's becoming its own item, its own element. And from this point on, it's an iterative process, right? So we can either continue to pick one. Let's go with the first one. And the idea is that hopefully with every iteration, the results get a little better and better and better, right? And that's questionable, of course, depending on what we want to do, but I quite am liking these, all of them. And they're all slightly different, right? So in here we have like a very strong element that sort of wraps around, and the facade is different on both sides. Right, so it's basically this, right? So this is one way to do it. So I'm quite satisfied with where these have gotten as one version.
So now that we have the shenanigans out of the way, I'm here to warn you about the absolute dangers of AI. It is here to take our proper architectural jobs away, and it is going to rid us all of the brilliant ideas that people have. And we're going to end up with what? With some kids running the world. Monkeys. How can we allow that to happen? We should outlaw all kinds of AI right now, because that is against the world. It is against the progress. Horrible stuff. Absolutely horrible stuff. Gosh, who came up with AI?
I'm kidding, of course, but AI is important. And how do I see it? I see it just like any other tool of the trade. It is a tool. It is nothing more, it is nothing less. The computers did not improve architecture, they merely changed it in the way that we produce things and the way that we can exercise our craft with. And it is no different with AI. It's not a tool of the trade, whether that we need to learn or we're going to get run over by the younger kids that would know how to use AI to produce not one iteration or 5 iterations of a design concept idea, but 200 while you were sketching away the dinosaurs, or we're not sketching away, but we're doing something in SketchUp, right? And in SketchUp, you know what kinds of ideas you can get out in a limited amount of time, whereas with AI, you can come up with a sketch, whether it's a paper sketch or even a 3D model, and for that 3D model, you can provide something that's much better. Well, not better, come on, that's a word, but a lot more iterations. And those of us that have been around design for a while, we know that architecture is an iterative game. It is not a full sum all, okay, this is my master sketch, unlike what even the big names are trying to show you. It's very much an iterative game. It's try something, then modify it and see how it works, and then move on again. All right, shall we get back now to the tutorial? Now let's pick another version that stays a little bit more true to what we have, and I quite like this here as well. So let's click on variations for that, go all the way up and see what it comes up with. The scale is a little bit off here, and it's also too metal, so it needs to soften that facade up. Let's go with the last one and just see what it results with. And as you can see with these iterations, we are starting to see some glass in there, which I think is important. So the final results, I'm not terribly excited about those, but from this dictionary of images that we have now, we can either go back and pick another one that we feel a bit better with. For example, now that I'm looking at it, I quite like this image, so let's try running that image through, and this one here as well. So we have an array of possibilities, it is possible also to kind of get a bit overwhelmed by all the possibilities that this offers, right? Because how do we judge which one is the one that we think works the best out of all of these? In this case, because I'm dealing with an abstract massing without any real context, all of them could suffice, or none of them could suffice either. But if we have some more parameters, like design parameters, then that would make it easier to inform our choices that best meet our context or our brief and so on. And these last two sets, so that second to last one, is quite successful in what it's producing, and also this one here in the way that the rap begins, but there's also something happening inside of it from the podium part, which is a bit different but also quite complementary to what's happening in there. Some of these could be quite interesting as well. It's a never-ending game, right? Especially in a case like this where our result is not attuned to specific constraints. We are getting closer to something that could look presentable. Although, I mean, the facade, you see how some elements are not completely correct. This one seems to be the most. The third one, because all the other facade items, they're a little bit different. They're slightly off. They're not too off, they're just slightly off. So if we keep on running this a couple of more times, we should get to something that looks even better. These turn out fairly well, and they actually demonstrate the strength of the system quite a bit. Now, this SDXL model, the newest one, which is still in beta, is better because we don't need to engineer the prompt as much as we had to in some of the previous models, which makes it easier to get better results without having to create these really crazy and really intense prompts. And I think that's the future, because you might have seen some videos of prompt engineering. It can get very intense with some prompt engineering. Thanks so much for watching this, and let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for more videos related to AI.